fellow students, Dr. Kajura, Lauren, and Victoria. To introduce ourselves, we are biodiverCITY, a group analyzing aspects of urban ecology with a focus on how humans can maintain biodiversity as urbanizations and cities continue to develop. This is just part of our group. A couple of our members are at the back. They will not be presenting. They're over there. I'm just letting you guys know.
Abby and Sydney.
Yes. Sorry. Okay. That's our group right over there. This is an image of all of our team members. And this is just an agenda talking about what we will be mentioning in our presentation. We're going to start off with some background information on our topic, followed by preliminary research questions, our to-do list, a timeline, and then finally our references. So our group is interested in investigating how the overaccumulation of anthropogenic waste is influencing freshwater ecosystems. We will be developing strategies on how to diminish this anthropogenic waste in our ecosystems, and that way we can help the environment through more effective waste management strategies. Let us take a look as to why we chose to do this topic.
Let's imagine a pristine freshwater ecosystem, a lake surrounded by a wooded area, frogs are hopping, fish are swimming, phytoplankton photosynthesizing. Now let's take that same freshwater ecosystem and toss in some buildings, roads, sewage flowing in through pipes, and physical garbage swimming in the water. Urbanization is defined by the OECD as the process by which a large number of people become permanently concentrated in relatively small areas forming cities. Although the goal of urbanization is to improve our quality of life, problems arise with rapid and unsustainable urbanization. Our population is increasing, and so is the amount of waste we're globally producing. It is projected that by the year 2050, our population will rise to 9.7 billion. With more people means more resource use and ultimately more waste. A large proportion of the waste is unrecycled plastic. When plastic is not properly disposed of, it can infiltrate our freshwater ecosystems. Here, it does not readily biodegrade. Instead, it breaks up into smaller fragments known as microplastics. These can be ingested by organisms impacting the ecosystem at multiple trophic levels. However, these implications are being studied under urban ecology, the study of relations between organisms and their environment in the context of an urban setting. Cities around the world are working towards more ecologically friendly living, known as eco-cities. These cities are focusing on improving their waste management strategies, aiming for a zero-waste society. Through various strategies, we are already seeing progression in achieving these goals.
Okay, so
Let's imagine a pristine freshwater ecosystem.
So there is an abundant amount of literature about overall aquatic marine ecosystems, but we decided to focus specifically on the freshwater ecosystems, that there is a little bit of less information, but we just wanted to explore that field. And freshwater ecosystems consist of things such as lakes, rivers, streams. Basically, freshwater ecosystems just have a smaller amount of salt in the water. And they are both a habitat and a passage. So they are habitat for complex ecological communities and contain species such as megafauna and microbes, which are particularly vulnerable to human activity development that may arise through urban development. And freshwater ecosystems also act as a passage for water and nutrients to travel from the land to the sea, which is also another way to carry this pollution into other ecosystems such as the marine ecosystems of the seas and the salt water and all of that. In a paper about challenges on freshwater biodiversity, 5 major threat categories were identified as listed over here. And we decided to focus on the water pollution aspect of it, and specifically one main thing that is creating a lot of this pollution. That item is plastic, and it will be further talked about by my colleague.
Awesome. So, as we saw in the video, the amount of plastic, or in general, waste pollution that we are creating is increasing with our urbanization and our increased population. We saw that from 2018, we created 2.01 billion tons of solid waste, and it's projected to grow to 33 billion tons by 2050. So it was actually found that about 54% of this waste is caused by, or is actually plastic waste, because of the emphasis that our society creates on convenience. Plastic is a big source of that. So it's found that plastic starts off in these urban areas, it travels to terrestrial ecosystems through improper disposal methods, and then it makes its way into freshwater ecosystems, and it can then further be transported into marine and ocean ecosystems through rivers and streams. So of course, these plastics have impacts on the freshwater ecosystems and marine ecosystems. Our group will specifically be focusing on the freshwater ecosystems. So of course, some things that we can see are wildlife ingestion and entanglement in these plastics, also bioaccumulation of the microplastics that the video referred to as well. And then it actually acts as a potential for invasive species to be introduced into the environment by clinging onto the plastics and being transported into the ecosystem. And all of these problems kind of arise due to the resistance of biodegradation of this plastic. Because it's such a rigid source, it's very difficult to remove once it makes its way into the ecosystem. So here we just have an example of a paper that we found that we'll be addressing as well, among others. However, it gives kind of a good infographic of the anthropogenic sources, that's us, that create this plastic pollution, which can eventually break down into the microplastics being consumed by fish communities, and it can actually even break down into further nanoplastics that will be consumed by even smaller species like zooplankton and phytoplankton, which will make its way up to further up the food chain. So our group will be investigating some of these leading eco-cities in terms of waste management. For example, Vancouver in Canada, Ljubljana in Slovenia, and Kamikatsu in Japan. And Kamikatsu actually has 35 different streams of waste. Ljubljana is going for that zero waste goal by 2040. Same with Vancouver. So these are some of the cities that we'll be modeling after. And we'll hopefully be looking into some ways that we can locally mitigate these issues. So we'll be looking into the city of Hamilton, their waste management strategies, and then even more local in terms of McMaster campus and some initiatives that we can take to reduce these problems on the freshwater ecosystems.
Okay, now I'll be going over our 3 research questions. So our first one are, in what ways are individual freshwater organisms affected by the exposure of anthropogenic waste in aquatic ecosystems? So for this question, we want to mainly focus on what species are affected and what species are affected the most. We also want to look at how the ingestion and entanglement in the plastic waste are affecting individual organisms. Our second question is, how does the introduction of plastic into freshwater ecosystems influence the dynamics of the food chain and the overall ecosystem stability on a larger scale? So for this question, we don't want to focus mainly on the specific organisms. We want to look at the interactions between species. We also want to look at how we can calculate the ecosystem stability so we can have a reference point and know whether the ecosystem is doing well or not doing well. We also want to look, for this question, what kind of conservation efforts are currently in place. The third question we want to look is how can McMaster University students practice sustainable waste management strategies to facilitate responsible disposal and alleviate impacts on aquatic ecosystems? So for this question, we want to look at what current laws, restrictions, and policies are in place by the governments and whether they're effective or not. We'd also like to look at how McMaster and Hamilton specifically, or what they have done in the past that has been effective. We'd also like to look at what current eco-cities and universities are doing effectively and how we could possibly integrate that into McMaster or Hamilton. Okay, so now I'll go over who we'd like to interview for each question. So for question 1, we plan to interview Dr. Karen Kidd or her lab. Her lab focuses on how human activities affect the structure and function of marine and aquatic ecosystems. For the second question, we plan on interviewing representatives of the Bay Area Restoration Council, which is a nonprofit organization whose goal is to restore Hamilton Harbor back to its former glory. We'd also like to interview Dr. Balsheen, who is a member of the Aquatic Behavioral Ecological Laboratory. For the third question, we plan to interview Greg Zibberbrandt and Peter Topolovich, who are members of the Sustainability faculty at McMaster. I'd also like to interview Andres Nagy, who is an executive at Zero Waste McMaster, which is a student-run club on campus, whose goal is to inform the public on how they can lead zero waste lives. We'd also like to interview the waste management department at the City of Hamilton.
Yes, and we've set some goals to keep us on track. The first one is to generate a research document, on improper waste management, both in the city and at McMaster. We'd also like to raise awareness about these issues on campus and design a more ecologically friendly system for our waste disposal. So better recycling and better compost, and more compost bins, which we found was a very big problem. We've made a to-do list as well for additional research into waste disposal at McMaster and in general. So we'd like to generate a template email, and this template email will help us effectively and efficiently contact everybody that we want to interview and try and get those interviews. We'd like to also request a tour of the recycling facilities at Hamilton so that we know where our waste is going, how it's sorted, and just in general what's going on over there. Here's our timeline. We'd like to, before reading week, have our emails all sent out to these consultants and people that we'd like to interview. We'd also, after reading week, like to perform these interviews and do some integration among the class. In early November, we would like to do our tour of the recycling facilities and gain our more knowledge there and see if there's anything we can improve upon. Then we will be practicing and doing our final integrated presentation, and our report will be done by the 27th of November.
So that is it for our presentation, and now we'd like to start the Kahoot. So if everyone could take their devices out.
So we have some members joining already. So the goal of the Kahoot is to kind of test your knowledge just slightly and then get a little bit of feedback from the class to see what you're interested in terms of what we should be getting out of our interviews and how we should further pursue our project.
Okay, so is that everyone? Anyone else left? Okay.
So the first question is multiple choice. Which of the following is an impact of plastic on freshwater ecosystems? The second option says potential invasive species introduction.
Awesome, you're all correct.
Most of you are correct. So next couple are more opinion based. We just want to hear what you guys have to say.
Their greatest concerns, their ideas on what we can do. Okay. All right.
So final question is, how do you think McMaster's waste management facilities can be improved? Transparent garbage and recycling bins, providing compost options, or more informative images on the recycling bins?
Wow.
Thank you for your contributions.
Why does it just say Kahoot?
So we can open the floor to any questions if anyone has any.
We have 1 minute.
Any questions?
Okay, thank you all for listening to our presentation, and we look forward to hearing your participation.